Sharon Hollingsworth, principal of Husk Interior Design Limited. Through her entire interior design career, Sharon has considered impacts to people and our planet, applying health science knowledge acquired as a microbiology technologist. Yes, Sharon is a scientist. Are you a scientist first or an interior designer first? Which one? I guess we'll find out as we go through this. Years immersed in the integrated design process provided opportunities to encourage material transparency on large commercial projects, achieving gold or platinum LEED certification. Principal of Husk Interior Design and faculty in the Interior Design program at BCIT, that's British Columbia Institute of Technology. Sharon is also a WELL AP, that is AP for Accredited Professional, since 2016, acting as WELL Administrator for local projects pursuing the WELL building standard. Sharon, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing your knowledge on this topic. I'm very interested to hear the message. Your screen, can you share?
Oh, I thought I was. Hold on. Hold on. Let's go try again. It is behaving differently now, of course. It says on my side that it's sharing.
So I'm seeing that now. Just have to make it full screen.
Yeah. Right now?
There you go.
Yeah, it showed. Okay, good. As long as we're good. Okay, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Chris. And thank you to NFCA to inviting me to speak today and have a conversation. So let's see. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded Coast Salish territory at the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm going to just turn my video, I think, off for this part. Let me just stop video. I can turn it on later so we can just pay attention to the screen. So I moved, as Chris was saying, from a health sciences career to a construction industry career. And I noticed fairly soon that some of the chemicals in the lab we were taking big precautions to stay away from. We were actually putting into our building products where we would have had a fume hood or something to protect us and a procedure to protect us. It was actually going into our buildings and our building products. It made me think about the people who are making those building products, who are installing them, who are living with them. So this is one person's viewpoint as an interior designer with a healthcare background. It does seem like the time is right to have these discussions. There does seem to be a lot of change, and we can look at what will help us as specifiers in the A&D community to help connect the dots. So the first part is about awareness. We'll go through a few resources, we'll have a dialogue, and then we'll close. And questions, Chris and I were talking, we can take them as we go. Sometimes it'll be a matter of saying that we'll talk to, just keep listening and we'll get to that. And sometimes we can just stop and talk. So it's meant to be a dialogue similar to the ones that led to this, where Chris and I and Lee have talked more than once about this topic.
Keep it organic. Ask your questions. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, let me get that. All right. So why does this matter? Why should we be aware? So as a WELL AP, if those who are familiar with the WELL standard, which we won't get into a lot today, their preconditions are mainly about awareness, achieving some key things and awareness, because once become aware of the impact our design has on the world, most people do want to change things and make things better. We as interior designers, for example, we have a lot of considerations to make when we specify anything: performance, design options, budget, installation, maintenance, embodied impacts, and durability all come into play. And we have various stakeholders on this call, and you've got a lot of concerns too. And sometimes green just gets tossed aside. But what we really want to be asking is, is there an environmental benefit to a product? Is there a detriment when we specify that product, and how do we get there? And again, things do seem to be changing at this time. I think most people, if they were purchasing a car, would not be buying a fully gas car. They would look at an electric car or even a hybrid. I think a lot of people renovating right now would look at getting electrified more and doing a heat pump. So in our specifications, I wonder why we can't look closer at all the equivalent impact green items, because one sector that really embodies this approach is childcare or residential. Most of us walk on the floor, sit on it once in a while. Children, they're on it all the time. They're pretty much eating the floor. So what we put on the floor does matter. Do you want to weigh in with anything, Chris?
Well, I'm just thinking, who drives the conversation? Who drives the need? Or is it a collaboration between the client and the interior designer? Do you bring the options to the client based on them saying, I want a green approach to this construction project?
Yes. Well, it is an early conversation in programming, and it should be an integrative design process where possible, where a lot of the team comes and has that conversation. Sometimes you have a client that comes and they have found you because that's their interest, but that's not always the case. That would often be more the case, for example, in a well project. If they're going for a well, they've also, they have some affinity to that approach. But often, especially on smaller residential projects or even commercial, it's something that we just can bring up early in the game and bring up the awareness and talk a lot about the why. Did you know this happens? There's lots of evidence-based design to share, and we can have those conversations without pressure. And not everything has to have an added cost to green, and not everything green has to look a certain way. So we just open it up. Sometimes, a client may not have really considered it.
Yeah, I guess if the client comes to you with that affinity, then they're more likely to have the budget, an interest in spending more money to get that desire met, as opposed to if you're taking the idea to them, you're probably going to get pushback. Well, show me the value. Show me the value. Mm-hmm. Difficult place to exist.
Yeah, it does make more work as the interior designer, but it is doable. You can, if there's an upcharge, for example, for a greener product, you can write almost a narrative that goes to the owner and the client, for example. And just to, again, pointing out that this does matter. I think it's getting easier to be green now. And Will speaks to this a lot because people are actually having trouble finding employees. And so if employees are most of their cost, and upcoming generations are even more aware of health and well-being, and they are asking for some things that anything green, not just in flooring, can help provide them, like better air quality, daylight and views, HR policies that lend themselves to better life quality, and so on.
I think as in politics, you vote with your feet, and in the terms of green, green purchasing, obviously you vote with your purchase.
Yes.
And this is what's turned maybe the car industry around, and remember sort of 15, 20 years ago, who killed the electric car was that video that was out, documentary. Mm-hmm. Very interesting to see how it was just shut down, wasn't ready. And now it's very different environment.
Yes. Yeah. We make a vote every time we pay for something, that saying, right? So true.
So when it comes to providing flooring, when will that turn happen? When will we meet that? I don't think we've met that fork in the road yet. It's a big topic. When we were talking before this presentation, we were talking about Scotchgard and all the chemicals that were made up in that product, and it's not on the market anymore, I don't believe. But boy, you couldn't have that conversation today, but you could 15 years ago.
Yeah, and there's a slide coming up about that, and we can go further.
Right.
I'm going to go to the next slide. Seems like a good time. A nice segue into that about how do you make decisions, right? So this slide is purposefully cluttered and multi-layered and incomplete. This isn't even, I wouldn't want to even estimate. this 50% of what's out there. And this particular session, as you can see, is a bit more of a dialogue. We're not going to go deep into any of these or too many of these, but this afternoon's sessions, I think, you know, it's also going to cover some of this, it sounds like, with Tarquette, and like some notably missing items under the far left whole building certifications. I didn't even put up a logo for the Living Building Challenge or Passive House. As far as the product certifications or eco labels, you know, MPI screens, paint standards aren't up there. And some of these are for most of these are in the building industry. Some, like Environmental Working Group, are more in the consumer product line, but they there is some crossover there.
These are all sustainability related.
Yeah, so all of these on the screen right now are called certifications or eco labels. Sometimes you could call them product certifications. And some of, you know, go into the standards such as ISO. I think most people, you know, may have heard ISO. ISO is international, of course, and it covers so many things from the manufacturing place to procedures. I'm just going to click this screen. So here's
let me ask you, why would you have to pick one or another of these groups or a group of them? Why would you have to do that? What's driving that you now have to choose a product that is ISO approved or meets the 4 score or whatever? Because, you know, it's just a jumble of standards out there.
Yeah. And in a few clicks, we'll show something that's promising to not make it so much of a jumble. But yeah, to answer your question, why would you? We can get a little earlier into the idea of environmental social governance and that realm in real estate investing.
Maybe it's regional?
Pardon me?
Maybe it's regional as well?
As regional? Well, yes, it's something happening here regionally, if I answer that correctly, Chris. The idea that, you know, that we talked before about in the ISTER world, they tell the story of the tobacco industry, you know, in the 50s or 60s. Companies started divesting from the tobacco industry because they saw it as a risk. You know, once it was medically proven that smoking caused cancer and lung disease, people saw that as a risk. Investors, people with money, pulled away. And what we're starting to see in the green building, and this is not my exact expertise as an interior designer. We have to know so many different little worlds, and this is just one of them that is, it's an activator of green building because, again, does a whole webinar series on, and I know it's Building Green, which we'll talk about in a moment, also has started some webinars on ESG, because the link for green building is that the investors are now investing in greener buildings because the less green buildings seem like a risk, right? So especially when you think about occupant well-being and things like infection control for future pandemics. So it's this in financial piece of ESG is actually driving our green building world, our building world, and making it more green. And then there's some discussion if there should be an H in that ESG, environmental, social governance, and health. That's harder to say, I guess. But so that's one thing that would make you do this. Just feeling like you want to do the right thing, having a whole building certification like WELL or LEED, or like I said, Passive House or Living Building Challenge, makes it easy because it packages up a lot of these for every material type, for example, whether you're looking at the optimization of a material, meaning how can it be more green, or low emitting of like the i.e. Quote unquote VOCs, that will give you a landmark and a system and a program to follow all in one place. So there's all kinds of levels on this slide. Just let me get that back, hold on.
So you can quickly lose hours trying to find the right standard or make sure the product is the right. And
this
yet,
is still showing,
you're not
right?
just looking at the flooring, you're everything, windows, all the interior stuff. I can't imagine, yeah.
Chris, I just want to make sure this is still showing, right?
Yep, I can see it, it's good.
Good. Yeah, it's a lot, right? This is why this slide is kind of built this way. It's a little messy, it's a lot. So here's some things to also think of. Now we're getting into material databases. We've had them for a while. I've got at least a dozen on my folders. The one that seems to be leading the curve perhaps, and is the mindful materials. They are describing themselves as a, let's see, I actually wrote down a quote from their own website. Certification agnostic. That actually might have been from the Building Green article. The common materials framework to help signatories to the AIA. There's a materials pledge from the Architects Institute in the States. That's what that's referring to. And similar industry pledges. So they're in the process of digitizing. I think they're gathering sponsors for that, but they're taking a lot of this stuff and putting it in one place. Another source, and the source I use the most myself is Building Green, which is below there. They have a material database called Designer Pages. I do say I use that less than Building Green as a kind of like having your own green consultant at your fingertips with just logging on. I'm a green consultant myself in Well, but I have used Building Green for years. They are a green consultancy that also does a lot of papers. And right now, just last week on Q, they released a white paper on this very topic we're talking about today, but beyond floors for everything, like how to navigate the certifications and eco labels.
That's a great resource.
It's really great. Yeah.
Is that something that the audience generally, for example, that we have today would know about and use?
We are at BCIT, we have a membership and we get our students to make an account early on to access our membership, and we bring it into assignments and so on because it is such a great resource, but I don't know how well known it is. So that's one reason I want to give them a little plug today, because you can find just about any topic. They're starting to build in more stuff for contractors too, and they offer courses.
Does that act like a third-party endorsement as well? So you're not getting, the bias that might come with a manufacturer's rep?
Yeah, they are unbiased. They would be green consultant unbiased, but I'm so glad you mentioned third-party because I hadn't said that yet. Third-party certification is obviously, a very important thing of any eco label or product certification. And there's various levels that go first, second, or third party verified. And actually that Building Green article that I just quoted has a good breakdown. Now, there would be a fee for that article if you weren't a member. I think they have a trial membership. There is a cost to their services, but it's kind of a one-stop shop. And Mindful Materials, I believe, is going to be free, but I'm, again, not the expert on that. And another source that I use is I'll go back one here. There we go. So the Green Science Policy Institute on the bottom left here, they have come up with a class concept approach, and their founder, Arlene Blum, was instrumental in taking tris flame retardants out of children's pajamas in the 70s. She's a mountaineer. She raised a family, and she's got some really great TED Talks.
Sharon, what is tris?
Tris is a flame retardant that we used to have in children's pajamas. So we probably grew up in tris pajamas, right, for a certain age. And then she was instrumental with her research to show that there were health problems associated with that. And then she came kind of back into this world, and I'll let her tell her story, but founded Green Science Policy Institute. And what they've done is a class concept approach. So what will happen is people will legislate out, governments will legislate out after some pressure to take out a chemical. But the way chemicals work is they're just slight variations will make a different chemical. And the way the legislation works is they've only legislated out that one chemical. So we'll talk about that in a moment more with PFAS is a really good descriptor of that process. But the idea of putting things into classes is brilliant because we don't have as much to think about as far as because there is more than one product in a class and the manufacturers can see where they can stand. And it's down to six really important things that we can look at right now. So it kind of chunks it out for the specifier and the manufacturer. So I think that class concept approach is really, really a good thing. So the other thing that is kind of top is legislation. If we can legislate it out, that makes it easier on everybody. So Europe has their REACH program, their European Chemicals Agency, and they seem to be ahead of us in this. And again, I'm talking from an interior designer's point, not just, 100% of my time is not doing green consulting, but that's my take as an interior designer.
What is North America's equivalent of that European?
We just have our own different legislation. So it'd be EPA in the US and our own agency here in Canada. And like we've outlawed, I'll say, PFAS and PFOA, and in the chemical group we'll talk about in the next few slides, but we didn't do all of them. So this is major because they are, one thing that's a great example is those of us who've been practicing for a while, remember when we had to make a special effort to specify low emitting paints, and then sometimes you go on site and that wasn't the paint can that you had specified, and you could smell it before you even walked into the site. And not everything that's bad has an odor, but that did. And now it's been legislated out. It's the easiest thing, right? When we get to that place, we can all breathe a little bit of a sigh, but we understand for the manufacturers, getting to that place can be difficult, right? They have to change systems.
Interesting, you raised the paint switch on the spec there, because as an installer myself back in the day, well, during the transition out of petroleum-based adhesives, for example, into water-based adhesives to meet the BOC or volatile organic compound laws that were hitting us, we would roll our eyes at the new adhesive, saying this isn't going to last. So we would then go get a can of stuff that would last, and we would justify it in our own heads by saying, this isn't going to end up in a landfill now in 4 or 5 years, because this adhesive will keep it stuck for the rest of its life. It was that rub, right, between performance, I guess, and chemical ingredients.
Yeah, it's a lot, to consider, because it's not green if it had to be replaced, right?
Yeah, that was our simple way of justifying the switch. Like, look at cutback adhesives, the black adhesive that you see underneath old VC tile. That doesn't go away, that stuff. That's like bitumen that they seal roofing with. So moisture barrier and adhesive, 2 in 1, 2 for 1. And we knew it. And so we would go get that can of stuff that was going to last, and the other stuff wasn't used.
And that's interesting to say, because with it's performance-based. So assessor's going to come in after and test the air quality. And so that kind of behavior could impact the certification, which is one reason, that's an example of why is performance-based. It's not just documentation saying we're going to do this.
That's good.
Because there are so many players, right? And that's another thing that will drive, hopefully, more green products is it's not just doing it's proving you did what you said you would do.
Yeah, we sort of touched on this a few weeks back when, I described the flooring, the skilled trades know their product and their installation and their requirements better than anybody else. That's what they do all day long, all week long, all year round. And so how many times do we, see a product spec, it arrives on site, and we're all looking at each other going, why is this being specified in here? This isn't going to last. But we don't get to, the protocols in construction, we don't get to phone you and say, wrong product, it's going to be a disaster.
Yes.
And so it's just very deflating if you care about this topic, that you're now having to go ahead and install something is not going to last. Because we don't have that that communication with you.
Yeah, and that's one thing we've been talking about. Part of the integrative design process should also be the specifier and the actual one person, the people installing it, and facilities and maintenance is another thing, right? You know, the maintenance of it, and we need more of that connection, because as a specifier, I don't want to know that what I specified isn't going to last. And, you know, we can do so much research, but we have a lot of other things we're working on in that drawing set as well. And there is a risk there, you know, we'll leave that for a closing thought. I won't get ahead of myself.
Construction has to improve the connection between the various parties that are involved in the whole process, from, you know, owner's rep to specifier to, you know, through the builder to the skilled trade somehow. I mean, you know, one of the ways we do it today is through our quality assurance third-party inspection program, because that program, through specification, forces everybody to attend a pre-installation site meeting before products are bought. And that's the part of the inspector's role, is to look through your specifications and have that conversation, so that, you know, if something is clearly the wrong spec, and I could give you a few examples, then we get to talk about it and switch it out as a group, rather than one entity switching it out while no one's watching.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Causes no end of suspicion.
Exactly. Yeah. And speaking of flooring, so this is taken from the previous slide, some specific production applications, actually, that should say product applications. So that are specific to what you would be working with here at NFCA. Maybe not the carpet, but
a lot of our members belong to Floor Score.
Yes.
I don't know about NS. I haven't heard of NSF.
They've been around for a while, and I haven't really heard too much about them. But, you know, what's interesting is, you know, there's a lot of crossover between, you know, thinking of the previous slide, for example, and they're sometimes different for thresholds. Like if they're talking about a toxin, they will actually have different units that they're requesting. And one thing that we've talked about before, and most of us are familiar with, is the idea, the air quality testing, either, you know, CARB or CDPH. CDPH being the California Department of Public Health, and their method 1.2 that was released in 2017.
What does that acronym stand for? CB?
California Department of Public Health, CDPH,
okay.
For air quality, for testing for emitting materials. And so CRI Green Label Plus for carpets, for example, they reference CDPH, and so does Floor Score. So it's like a testing behind a label.
Right, I've heard of CRI is Carpet and Rug Institute, and they're a big player when it comes to standards for carpet in the industry, very well respected.
Yeah, so, and you know, it's interesting. Yes, they are well respected, but that I don't have time really to go into some of the pros and cons of these. But sometimes they may be like Floor Score. I've read that maybe sometimes it's sometimes it's looking at the emissions, which is kind of where we started in green building. I think, as somebody who was, you know, working 20 years ago, that was that was the first time we really started talking about health. Like we're talking about, you know, we talked a lot about sustainable woods or energy, of course, like it still is, right? It was a big topic. And the one thing that really I felt was affecting people's health was the off-gassing. Yeah. And but there is so much more, right? So much more to look at.
What was that big lawsuit in the US, lumber liquidators? It ended up on that documentary series, 60 Minutes, and they were talking about off-gassing of formaldehyde being way beyond what the allowable government level was, or the controlled level was. And, you know, I guess most of us on the call will have heard of CARB, the Californian Air Resources Board, which drives a lot of manufacturers and how they create their products, and how much formaldehyde they use, et cetera, phthalates and all that sort of stuff. And I have heard recently that Canada, the government of Canada, is also bringing in their own sort of version of CARB, which probably will align with CARB. Manufacturers should be aware of that. You can find it online by Googling, Canadian government formaldehyde restrictions, all that sort of stuff. It pops up and you can read it and make sure that you're complying.
Mm-hmm. Move to the next slide, Chris. So, when you have all these different eco labels and certifications and databases, maybe people on the call have some favorites that they use. Maybe they've never used any of them. But again, you've got, you can also step back and just think kind of logically about all this and come up. These are 4 steps towards greener product specification. But, I've divvied these out differently through over the years. I've read other people speaking, divvying it up, but it all kind of goes down to the same place where, you do have to think holistically when you're specifying, use some common sense, firsthand experience, as well as those certifications. They're just one tool. For example, it may make more sense for a project to use something regional than it would be to use certified wood from halfway around the world. And there's a lot of, when you talk about material vetting, which means like, how do you choose a material, decide which one to use? There's a lot of food analogies. Are you buying organic or are you buying local and non-organic? So that's been tossed around for a lot in the past. And, certifications don't cover all aspects of the product, such necessarily as performance, right? And you played into that really well earlier with your comment about the bitumen back flooring product.
Yeah, the distance that the product has to come was the first time I ran into, well, actually 2 things I ran into with lead the first time it sort of dawned on me what was going on with lead years ago. As a, just a regular floor guy, was you could not buy or use product that was outside of 500 kilometers away from the project. Which I thought, that's a good idea. That must challenge a lot of people.
Yes.
And the other was bamboo, because it was, a grass, and, you can buy bamboo that grows, 3 feet in a day. Obviously a renewable resource, but problem is there's so many glues and resins put into the product. By the time it actually reaches the market, it's questionable. But those were the 2 things that turned my lights on to lead back in.
Yes, yeah, that was early lead stuff, right? And the rapidly renewable, and then the idea that we learned that only maybe even just one company has a certified wood, FSC certified wood for their bamboo, and then there was panda habitat discussions and all important stuff, so multifactorial. So to, you have to kind of think holistically along with it and not just say, it's got that certification, I'm going for it. And then asking questions, because again, these certifications, none of them are 100% comprehensive. They'll sometimes, like I was talking with Floor Score, look at one thing, right? And there's so much to look at. And we still, unfortunately, have to be wary of greenwashing. So years ago, there was the 6 sins of greenwashing. We used to look to a lot. It still happens. When a manufacturer builds an environmentally friendly image around a questionable project or highlights select practices. So it's holding the manufacturers, the certifiers, responsible for providing clear information about their green claims. So we can just, it's interesting when you just start sending an email, you get sent down the line. Before you know it, you're high up in a company having a discussion. That one-on-one dialogue can be very helpful for both parties. And to dig deep, not all certifications are equally reliable. And but when I say dig deep, I think some specifiers, in the A&D community are thinking, I don't have time to dig deep. No. So one way to chunk it out is to say that either, get together, do your own research, do, an accreditation, your well or your lead exams, join groups, work for a firm that already has this inherently in their practice. But anybody can just decide that every project, they're going to vet 3 green things, and they're going to dig deep on those 3. and then they're going to have that product knowledge and now the installation and performance knowledge, good or bad. And if it was good, you can take that to the next project, right? The idea of just to keep learning and to overall just remember to care about it, right? Because
as an inspector, when I do research, I do not want to waste my time. I going back to research kills me. It's just one of my pet peeves. So if I'm going to go off in one direction, as you're sort of alluding to here, I want to know I'm going in the right direction, because I don't have time to spend 3 hours going in the wrong direction, back up and do another 3 in a different. This is how you got to weed through all this stuff and get to the good stuff. And this is hopefully what we'll get out of this presentation is how do you do that to save your precious time as an interior designer?
Yeah, and the last slide we'll talk about that and more too, and wrap that up. But this is a chemical group that's
right. You mentioned PFAS earlier on. I was going to say, what is that acronym?
Compounds, we used to call it PFCs, and I didn't even tell you the story yet, Chris, but one reason I was kind of tuned into this really early on is we had a pet budgie many years ago, like 30 years ago, and this budgie used to be free flying some of the time, and I took the budgie to a vet for a reason, and the vet said, "You don't have Teflon pans, do you?" And it was the 80s and everybody had Teflon pans. And I said, "Yes." And they said, "So don't cook high heat on your Teflon when your budgie's flying around, they may die."
Wow.
And I thought, oh, wow, that does not sound good. Right? Why are we? So you're telling me my little pet bird is like a canary in a coal mine thing, right? And it can't be good for us. So there was very little research I could gather. And now I know it's just because it really wasn't publicly available yet, but there was things going on. So a movie I would really recommend people watch is, if you haven't already, is Dark Waters. And its documentary is Devil We Know. And that goes through the story of lawyer Rob Billett in Ohio and West Virginia. There was water contamination from the nearby Teflon production. So that's a PFOA chemical. And later, we legislated it out here in Canada, for example, but when I first started looking into it, people would tell me there's 600 types of PFAS chemicals. Now I'm reading 12,000. So, I mean, just if because I have a basic chemistry background because of my med lab, you understand like the different formulations. And that's another thing that keeps popping up, is that you almost feel sometimes as an architect, and I can't speak for the architects, but I know as an interior designer, you almost feel like you need a chemical background, right? Some understanding of basic chemistry, and that's not going to happen very often. Mine's basic enough that I can recognize, like I said at the beginning, some chemicals that I knew were bad. And so when I see them on a product, I'm like, that can't be good. Right? Like, so these are fluorine based, and fluorine is bad for you in the lab, right?
So PFAS chemicals sort of made up what was called Teflon, which I believe was originally a military scientific breakthrough to sort of protect against bullets and armor piercing, whatever, Kevlar jackets, and so. But I guess once they made this great product, or this very efficient product, they thought, well, how else can we make money from it? And then it ends up in your home, frying your eggs, and it's problematic.
And what we didn't know, right? And not following the precautionary principle. And since testing, the EPA started testing in 1999 because some of this lawsuit that Rob Billett helped the communities with, one of the compensation was they would monitor these people. It's quite horrific when you see the documentary, the film, and the cattle dying. And
that's the film with Mark Ruffalo.
Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway, if we go Hollywood.
I did see that. It was a great film.
Yeah,
great film. Well worth a watch.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy to find. I own it now. It's not easy always to find, which is interesting.
Dark Waters. You heard it here, folks. Go watch that film.
Yeah, and DuPont had a spin-off company, Chemours, after that continued some of that contamination. And so anyways, back to the testing, they started in 1999, they started testing it, sorry, at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the States. And almost everyone tested positive for PFAS chemicals. Wow. And this is, I've read this from around the world, and animals and polar bears, and these are forever chemicals. These are persistent pollutants. And I am part of a stakeholder group with the Green Science Policy Institute. We meet bi-monthly from around North America to share information. And I'm in there as an educator and interior designer. There's a lot of PhDs. There's, you know, professionals from larger green architectural firms. And there's a firefighter from Ottawa. And the idea is that the firefight, we think this is bad for us. So they lent me kindly the direct file for these images from Green Science Policy Institute. So here's a child, you know, they're ingesting it again. It's like they're on the floor, they're touching the sofa, whatever. There's the installer, right? Grout tile sealer, sorry, has a lot of PFAS. It's hard to find one that doesn't.
Right.
And well, just to go speak to flooring for a second, you usually, in this book on the left, which I believe you can get it for free, Building a Better World, it's more the sealers and so on, like I was saying with that, but going on back to the firefighters thing. So it's bad enough that you're just in a normally functioning home and you're exposed to these things, but when it's burning, this is why firefighters have higher cancer rates than anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So they are part of this stakeholder group, and of course they should be. And there's a lot of great PFAS stuff happening. Like compared to my budgie story in the 80s, I can't believe how things are exploding. I just opened up the journal. I still subscribe to the Lancet and the Journal of the Medical Association, and they published about PFAS. The state of California has just introduced legislation to legislate it out. Earlier this year in the States, the TSCA, their Toxic Controlled Substance Act, I hope I have that right. It's basically making anything made in North America, they have to report their PFAS content, because that's, again, that awareness piece. Often this green building stuff just starts with reporting, because we did not follow the precautionary principle. We have millions of chemicals in our world now that we created that we don't even know all of them, right?
You remind me of, you know, when we were re-sanding and finishing hardwood floors, you know, we did a lot of square footage through the year in high-end homes and whatnot. And one salesperson came in with the latest, greatest finish. I won't mention any names, but there was a chemical in that two-component finish. You mix the two, you mix this little bottle of basically poison in with your finish so that it would go hard once it air dried. And they said, do not get this on your hands.
Yes.
It will turn your skin black. And eventually the black will fall off as your skin naturally sort of dies and replenishes. And obviously do not drink it, you will die. And I'm thinking, this was one of my first introductions to flooring and construction. Yes. And I'm like, wow, I'm being told this and he wants me to buy this product?
Yes.
And there was another, again, another name I won't mention. I know you know it because you're an interior designer in Vancouver. It was a finish that was used on a regular basis. I was the dispatcher at the time, so I caught all the problems that came back from the homeowners. You know, if the tradesman was late, or if he left cigarettes on the pathway, or he made a mess, I got the phone call. Well, this one Monday morning, I got a phone call from a lady who was just choked because our finish had killed her prize parrot.
Oh, see, there's a bird thing again.
Which she left in the basement. We told her, you got to clear all your plants out, all your animals, but she didn't do that. She left the parrot in the basement, and it was, you know, literally hanging upside down on when she came home from, not good. So that's the sort of products we're using. We know we're using them, and yet blindly we carry on.
Yeah, and as a specifier sitting in your office at your computer, right? We are removed from that. That's why it's worth taking a look, you know, I didn't even mention EPDs and HPDs on this few slides back, because again, there's just so many things to look at, but
It's like the firemen. The fire drives me crazy when you see, you know, and all the firemen and the challenges they had getting money out of the government down in the US for 9/11, just to help them with their health problems. It's, you know, it's like there's this sort of tendency for the human race to not deal with problems until the wheels have come off, let alone squeaking. We just wait for the wheels to, and then we start to look back and go, well, what can we do now? It's kind of too late. You got cancer.
Yes. Yeah. And we've polluted our planet, and, you know, our summers aren't the same now as they were when I grew up. You know, if somebody's 3 years old, they think a forest fire summer is just the norm.
Right. Yeah. It was the first time I drove across the into the interior. I was going to Edmonton, and I before I looked at the weather report to see if I was going to get snowed off the road, I looked at the fire report to see if I would be blocked by a wall of fire. That happened a few years ago, and I thought, this is different.
Yeah, I'm gonna on that note, I'm gonna go to this next slide because it's gonna kind of wrap that idea up. Oh, I did it again. Hold on. This is not my usual. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. So like we're having, right? And we've had a few of these now, Chris. We just have to start talking about it. It isn't important, you know, it's a lot to change and what's going to make us change, but hopefully, you know, the environmental racism and the forest fires and the cancer rates. There was recently last week, and I had trouble refinding it because I had some computer crashes last week, but it was either the Lancet or the JAMA that it was a plea from physicians to really make sure we pay attention to chronic diseases as much as we're paying attention to communicable diseases right now. So, you know, one's like infectious diseases. There is a link between those two, and the fact that the cancer rates, the heart disease, and so on, you know, the healthcare costs of all of this, they want to just make sure we don't forget that. And what we put into our buildings relates back to that. It's multifactorial. You can't always say you used that product you talked about earlier with the 2 parts that unfortunately, you know, had a terrible impact. No one's going to say that's your fault, right? Because they'd say cancer is multifactorial, right? And this is part of the problem. So it would be better just if we didn't have these things. I mean, it's kind of, again, like the food analogy. If you look at a label and you don't know what that is, don't eat it.
Don't eat it. Meanwhile, we see healthcare.
And it's got a big chemical name. Try not to use it. But the problem is sometimes that's your only choice. So that's where the industry, you know, these conversations are important.
Meanwhile, we see healthcare budgets just ballooning for various reasons, but wouldn't it be better to take a preventative approach? I mean, we do at some level, but is it enough? I don't know. Yeah,
and is it going to be enough fast enough, right?
I mean, I was looking, I did some research because this topic really interested me, and I'm just going to read out 6 of the regular plastics that we all touch every day. I'm not going to explain them too much because we'll get lost in chemical words and whatnot, but PETE, polyethylene, HDPE, high density polyethylene, PVC, polyvinyl, LDPE, low density polyethylene, PP, polypropylene, PS, polystyrene, and then 7 others they don't even mention. Now that includes water bottles, shampoo bottles are a different type of plastic, vinyl flooring is in there, grocery bags and toothpaste tubes are a different kind of plastic, car fenders, disposable cutlery is another category of plastic, and then styrofoam. And they class them all as either, they rate them for durability and recyclability. And not many come out as very recyclable, and most are not durable, although there are some that are very durable. But you know, when you see those 3 arrows going around in a circle that we all feel comfortable, oh great, I've got a recycled product in my hand, and when I throw it out, somehow it's going to end up back on the shelf.
that is not the case. With regards to that symbol, what it is, let me just read something out. While it is true that the 3 arrows indicate an item that can be recycled, it does not mean that it will be accepted as such, or that facilities even exist to do so. All it means is it can be recycled. I just think that's shocking, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You should throw your hands up in the air.
Yes, when we make these plastics, we don't always have the facilities to recycle them. Just recyclable versus will it be recycled are 2 different things. Yeah.
But, you know, here I am, a regular user of all those products. Do I want to bring my 4 liters of milk home in a paper bag instead of a plastic jug? No. But what are we doing to try and rethink this? I love it that I can't use grocery bags, plastic bags. I've been to the grocery store, been told, sorry, sir, we don't supply bags anymore. You can have these totes for like $3 or whatever. And I have literally carried my, rather than spend the money on a tote, carried the groceries out in my arms and then remembered to take my own bags next time. And it was not until that happened that I did something about that my habit changed.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy because, you know, we can change our habits on how we specify products or, you know, what we install on site for.
We need to be forced to do it. I mean, we're naturally sort of somewhat lazy. Everything we do is about becoming more comfortable or having the choice of comfort. Well, that choice needs to be removed in some sectors.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm just going to interrupt quickly. I'm sorry, we've got 5 minutes left for the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, so here's the last slide then. So to just tie into biophilia just a minute, we won't get into the whole biophilic principle, but you know, we've done things a certain way, like we've been talking about, but what would nature do, right? Biomimicry. What is our flora in a forest, for example? That's taking it a little far, but you know, it would be soft and it would be renewable and it would support the biodiversity of the forest. And maybe we can't get there, but we could try a little harder because it's definitely the opposite of a plastic floor. And we are all in this together. We've been talking about all the challenges we have. It's not about pointing fingers, manufacturer, specifier, or installer. It's just realizing that it probably is time to make a change. And something I keep hearing, I'm starting to hear more now of is TACO, the acronym for Transparency, Assessment, Commitments, and Optimization. Steps along the way from doing nothing as a manufacturer to making optimal products. You know, and the idea that it's about a dialogue. You know, what's the opposite of a regrettable substitution? If you substitute one bad thing, if you just put in another bad thing, that's not going to work. It'd be nice to get to a point where everything's legislated. We're not there. Can we make a decision to make steps towards that legislation while we're waiting for governments and pressuring governments to do it? Because what would nature want us to do? You know, we are part of nature, not separate from it.
Yeah, yeah, well said.
Okay. So that's my notes, Chris. Do you want to?
That is.
That's it.
Do we have hemp carpet tile yet? I don't know.
Pardon me?
Do we have carpet tile made from hemp yet?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
It's you know, it's such a challenging topic because we're all part of the problem. We don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution, but we're not all pulling the strings. And so, you know, we end up in this static sort of position where we hope that we're going to be guided by other forces. And, you know, as you can see with the PFAS story you told, that's not necessarily going to happen. How do you get to the truth, the facts, and especially as a specifier, if you're just trying to do your job to get good product on site that's going to last, not end up in a landfill and make you look good still 5 years down the road because it's performing well, rather than getting that horrible phone call. My floor looks like heck. You said it was going to last 10 years.
you know, it's very important to have these conversations and this open dialogue and those resources that you've shared, Sharon. I did look, you sent me the Building Green guide. I looked at that video last night, and that's another great resource. Yes, you pay for it, but if it can save you 3 or 4 hours looking at one product, got to be value for money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking of it. You know, your billable hours versus just having an annual membership to something, or joining a stakeholder group, you know, a few times a year or something, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Any questions? Because we are through the slideshow, and I'd like to think that we have a few questions we can hand to Sharon here. I don't see any that have been typed in. I mean, if there are any interior design, what are your challenges? I mean, share with us, what have you gotten out of this presentation? What did we miss? What did we hit on? Does anybody have a comment? We were talking about wasting time, looking for product and trying to get through the minutiae of marketing material. Has this presentation been a good hour spent? Sheila Schmidt, I see your face on my screen. Any comments? Do you think this was good information? Was there anything any takeaways? Just unmute yourself there, Sheila. Sheila, if you can unmute yourself.
I said it's difficult when most products seem to have it in it. So yes, it's good information, but I don't think we're there yet to really address it.
So you still feel all the products that cross your desk, you can't avoid the chemicals. So you throw up your hands. It makes it
well,
difficult.
not throw up your hands. I mean, we bring in the safest ones we can, but from what this is saying, yeah, they probably still are not safe, or maybe they are and the sealants aren't, things like that. And we are bringing in the safest ones we have found. So.
Well, that lawsuit I mentioned down in the US, there was a lot of money on the table. That generated a lot of conversation about formaldehyde, questions about, well, what is that formaldehyde stuff? Why is there a big lawsuit? And so people learned a lot about it in a short space of time. So that's a big, fat, ugly lawsuit. Is that what it takes? I guess that's what turned DuPont around with the PFAS.
I think it usually does. It usually does.
Too bad, eh? So there we have to rely on the lawyers.
Yeah.
We also
then
have
after the innovation comes.
Right. Yeah. What are we going to do to beat this negative press on formaldehyde? What's the green alternative? So yeah, I agree with you, Sheila. That's when you get the brain trust comes to the table and rethinks how we're going to make these products. So it's kind of requires that kick in the pants, not just a natural organic progression towards doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the legislation piece. And there are really green products out there, but that's that vet 3. You know, you find them, you use them again. We were doing no brand names for this presentation. So Sheila, if you want to reach out to me later, we could talk, share some ones that you could consider using. There is hope.
I'm gonna pick on someone else.
Oh, excuse me 1 second. Deborah Day has a comment, has a question.
Oh, good. Deborah, speak up.
It says here, is there a third-party organization in Canada that can assess products for you?
Yeah, so Deborah, that would be like that one slide showed with all those certifications, product certifications. There's a mix of them. I don't think we have I haven't heard of like a legislated one-stop shop from our environmental federal wing. So I don't think we're there yet. Third-party organization Canada can assess products for you. If you, again, look at Building Green, that's North American, but it will be a lot of the same products, and so they can help you through that. just asking your manufacturers for that information, but there doesn't seem to be, mindful materials will be helpful, but there doesn't seem to be a one-stop shop that I know of, but if anybody finds out, please let me know.
I think the next comment, Tracy Morrick makes a good point here that, I mean, leaning on we need the manufacturers to help clarify and focus. And, you know, I guess the more the interior designers complain to the manufacturer's reps, there's a strong connection between the two, the more likely you're going to get that message heard and changed so that clarification comes. I mean, Tracy, does your firm, the people you work with, do they work hard to clarify that message and make it as easy as possible to get the right product specified?
Well, yeah, like if the designers want to work with us, they can definitely let us know what's important and what they require for material considerations. And then we can fine tune and direct them towards certain manufacturers that support them on whether it's certifications, PVC free products, if they're looking for rubber and so forth. So yeah, don't try and take it all on your own. Reach out to distributors, manufacturers, and then they can help pin down categories and collections for you. So,
and it's going to be, you know, your relationship and your trust between each other to do the right thing, you know, rather than bringing a third party that has no skin in the game. That relationship is going to be key to making a decision based on your recommendations, right? So it's the danger is it's sell product first and then think about things that maybe were the right decision later on. But if you trust your rep and that company has been around a long time and does the right thing, that's a great starting point to cut through all the minutia
of that particular product sector, and then move on to another rep with another different product group.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, those relationships are key, and that's where we have made changes. You know, some of us were sending emails to textile companies 15 years ago asking about PFAS, and now they're at these stakeholder meetings, right? And they have made a lot of movement in the right direction. So it's that asking the question piece.
And that's over the last 5 years or so? Is that a recent development?
Yeah, pretty recent. Yeah. Pretty recent. You know, they started in the background earlier, but you know, we've made a lot of headway. And that's just one chemical group, and you know, multiple products, but one chemical group.
Yeah, so surprised. Here we are in 2022, and we're still, you know, you would have thought these things would have been dealt with a long time ago, but they just haven't. Don't take it for granted. You got to work with people you trust and who know their stuff, and that will help you save a lot of time and get to the right specification. Because what you've shown, Sharon, just, I mean, that whole page dedicated to a jumble of standards just boggles my mind. I mean, we're a standards body, and as NFCA trying to get installation process put into place. There's nothing like what you're facing to try and climb through and get to the meat and potatoes. So I sympathize.
But it is to end positively. It is possible. You know, you do end up with a list of materials and installation procedures and distributors and so on that you can rely on again and again, and you can stay away from the bad and specify the good. And we are developing more tools than we had 20 years ago when some of us were starting to look for these things, right? And then you learn as you go, right? What to specify, but legislation will help.
Legislation will help, and you're helping. You're a great resource. You know, I'm sure all these folks will keep your number, and probably you'll receive a call or three in the near future. But in the meantime, if there's no more questions, then we will let you go, Sharon. And
okay.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks
for sharing your knowledge and wisdom.